So this video got copyright blocked by NBC Universal in almost every country. It's blocked in the USA, all across Asia. I don't actually know where the original version isn't blocked. So I had to go in and cover up the footage of the movie, which is like 80% of the review, with a screenshot of Adelaide Clemens making a funny face. There are a lot of those in this movie. But if you want to see the video as it's supposed to be viewed, go to the Rumble or BitChute links in the description below. Seriously, guys and gals, it's just a click away. Go down there, click the link, watch the proper version. Do it! Hello everyone, sorry this is a bit late, or a lot late. A lot has been going on lately. Most notably, I'm now the proud, slightly nervous father of a baby boy. So that cut into recording and editing a bit. Anyway, enjoy the video. I really love the song Silent Scream.
I don't like anything else about you.
Actually, that's not quite true. Rewatching Revelation, I realized there are several things in it that are better than I remembered. Overall, the movie is still a complete train wreck, though. It's not exactly a hot take to say that Silent Hill Revelation, the second Silent Hill movie, is bad. I would go as far as to say it might be the worst major piece of entertainment in the Silent Hill franchise. But what happened with this movie? Let's dig a little deeper than most reviews and look at its development. The first Silent Hill movie was released in 2006. Here's a hotter take in the Silent Hill fandom. I think Silent Hill 2006 is fine.
Mob supplies! Get your angry mob supplies here!
Not great, but not terrible. The setting and practical effects are genuinely very good translations of Silent Hill to live action. The changing of the cult from pagans trying to birth their god to a group of puritanical witch hunters is less interesting, and the changing of Emolessa and Dahlia's relationship loses a lot of the pathos and emotional weight of the game's story. Christoph Gant's reasoning for changing Harry Mason into Rose de Silva is cringe and frankly kind of offensive, but that's behind the scenes stuff. Taken as its own thing, on its own merits, separate from the games, it's a nice-looking horror movie with a good creepy atmosphere and a plot that's not amazing, but is functional. Maybe part of the reason I feel that way is because by the time I saw the movie, I already knew that it had been ripped apart by the game's fans, so I went in with low expectations, but that's my opinion of the first movie in a nutshell. The same year the first Silent Hill movie came out, writer and director Christoph Gans said that Sony had officially ordered a sequel. Gans quickly became busy with other projects, and over time it looked less and less likely he would be involved. But in 2009, Sony announced that Gans' co-writer, Roger Avary, had been signed on to write the script. Aside from the first Silent Hill movie adaptation, Avary has co-written some pretty big films, including a little film you might have heard of called Pulp Fiction. Filming on Avary's version of the second Silent Hill movie was supposed to start in 2010, but a wrench was thrown into this plan when Avary had to go to prison for killing someone. Yeah, that happened. Avary was driving under the influence and was involved in a car crash that killed a man in 2008. In 2009, he was sentenced to 1 year in work furlough and 5 years probation. Work furlough means that Avary would have been allowed to leave the prison where he was serving his term during the daytime to go to work, so he would still be able to make the movie. But after posting about his furlough conditions on Twitter, Avary got his furlough rescinded and had to serve a year in prison. Still a very light sentence for manslaughter, but Avary technically got a lighter punishment for actually killing the man than he did for tweeting about it. Hollywood and the American justice system are quite a combination, huh? The important part is that Avary was off the project, and his role was taken over by M.J. Bassett. M.J. Bassett is a writer and director of several films you've probably never seen, like Death Watch, Wilderness, and a 2009 adaptation of Solomon Kane. This might seem like a major step down, but it wasn't all bad news. Bassett is a fan of the games, and Death Watch won a bunch of European Film Awards, mostly for Best Fantasy, which is kind of weird because it's a horror movie set in World War I, but whatever. In an early interview, Bassett confirmed that Silent Hill Revelation would be an adaptation of Silent Hill 3, but also stressed that it was a sequel first and staying consistent to the backstory and characterization from the first movie was more important than copying the game. Reading this surprised me because while Revelation is far from a faithful adaptation of Silent Hill 3, it takes tons of elements from the game that weren't in the previous movie, retcons things from the first movie, and even includes things from the game that don't really fit well within the movie and seem to only be there because they were in the game. Before reading the interview, I'd always assumed that the retcons were part of a deliberate attempt to bring Silent Hill Revelation away from the first movie, which hardcore fans had been dissatisfied with, and bring it closer in line with the games. But apparently not. Bassett put up social media posts asking fans for casting suggestions, but ended up shutting down the poll on Claudia Wolf and disregarding all of the suggestions, calling them not very imaginative. Years after Revelation had released and the dust had settled, Bassett made several complaints about the production process, saying the film felt like a collaboration, despite Bassett having sole writing and directing credit. Bassett also said that trying to reconcile catering to a general audience with pleasing fans was basically impossible, and regretted tying the game and film canons together. It all adds up to a troubled production, mainly on the writing side of things, and a film that not even the writer and director seems happy with. With this in mind, let's take a deep dive into Silent Hill Revelation, including a look at how it compares to Silent Hill 3, the game it's based on, and how well or not well it lines up with the first Silent Hill movie. The movie begins with a cold open of Heather in Lakeside Amusement Park, just like Silent Hill 3, except also completely different. In Silent Hill 3, after treating players to close-ups of the carousel, we meet Heather wandering and confused with no idea where she is or how she got there. Players are then given control, and you're free to wander around this creepy environment at your leisure. There are some monsters wandering around in some portions of the opening area, but they're slow and mostly ignore you. For the most part, there's really nothing particularly pressing, including a clear goal of what you're supposed to do to advance. Players are left to wander around this creepy environment, inspecting things at their leisure. It's slow, subtle, and atmospheric, especially for a video game. In the movie, the Lakeside Amusement Park opening is a chase scene with Heather running from these Roby boys. With no context of who these people are and no context of who Heather is if you don't know the game, there's no real reason to be emotionally invested. The chase scene also isn't particularly exciting. There's no real obstacles or tense moments as Heather tries to escape the Robes, who frankly aren't intimidating. In fact, the 30 belts this guy wears on his torso just look goofy. Lakeside Amusement Park itself actually looks pretty good though. This was one of those pleasant surprises I had revisiting this movie. The set design is a lot better than I remembered. Barely a few minutes in, we get to the next reoccurring problem in the movie: jump scares. Lots of this film's critics complain about the jump scares, but a lot of the time they just seem to focus on the fact that jump scares exist in the movie at all, and not that these particular jump scares are handled really badly. In this one, for instance, Heather takes shelter behind a stand next to a costumed Robbie the Rabbit figure, like the ones that appeared in the game, and the camera focuses in on Robbie for several seconds before cutting back to Heather and then back to the rabbit. It's so painfully obvious that Robbie is going to move that the scene might as well have a jump scare incoming title card up in flashing letters. So Robbie scares Heather out of cover where the Roby boys couldn't find her despite her being lit up by a spotlight, and she runs to the carousel. In the game, the carousel and its later importance were only teased in the opening with a couple of shots, but the movie is way more heavy-handed. Also, Pyramid Head's a carny now who runs the carousel by turning a crank. A lot of fans wish Pyramid Head wasn't in either of these movies, and yeah, he doesn't really fit into either of them. It's not just a matter of, in Silent Hill, he's James's monster. It's a completely different continuity. But again, looking at the first film on its own merits, all Pyramid Head does in it is kill some plot-irrelevant cultists. He could be cut completely, and it wouldn't affect the plot at all. But at least he's built up in that movie to be a powerful, threatening presence. In Revelation, being thrown in as decoration right off the bat really cheapens him and makes him less scary. Don't worry though, Pyramid Head's role in this movie gets way worse. But Pyramid Head isn't the star of the scene. That would be Dark Alyssa, who tells Heather not to come to Silent Hill before lighting her on fire. But of course, it's all just a dream, like in the game. But unlike the game, it's established that Heather has been having reoccurring nightmares, presumably all like this and caused by Dark Alyssa to get her to stay away from Silent Hill. The thing is, Heather and her dad are already avoiding Silent Hill. If Dark Alyssa's goal is to get Heather to stay away from Silent Hill, tormenting her with reoccurring nightmares about Silent Hill when she's already cooperating seems like a bad idea that could backfire. Especially since in the first movie, reoccurring nightmares about Silent Hill were the reason Sharon was taken to Silent Hill by Rose, which Dark Alyssa should know about because she was in the first movie, albeit with a completely different personality. So Dark Alyssa's kinda dumb. But anyway, after waking up from her nightmare, Heather is talking to her dad when he gets stabbed by the movie's version of the missionary, who looks a lot like a Cenobite. But it's just another nightmare. Yes, the movie uses the double nightmare ploy, a sure sign of scraping the bottom of the barrel to try to scare the audience. Next is the infamous Pop-Tart jump scare, which is maybe supposed to be funny. If that's the case, it should have gone more over the top with the editing and use of a scare cord. The real horror of the breakfast scene isn't the Pop-Tart, though, it's the dialogue. "I hope you enjoy your first day at your new school, Heather, who used to be called Sharon. It doesn't really matter because we move around so much, Harry, who used to be called Chris." That's barely an exaggeration of how unnatural the exposition is in this scene. It's really unnecessary, too, because immediately after Heather leaves for school, Chris has a flashback of Rose leaving Sharon with him, making it clear to the audience for the second time in a few minutes that Heather is Sharon. Rose stays trapped in the other world because she can only send one person through, because if Rose was in the rest of the movie, it wouldn't be able to follow the plot of Silent Hill 3 as closely as it does. Rose used the Seal of Metatron, which is from the game but served a completely different function, to get Sharon out of the other world, but she can only get one of them out because the seal is incomplete. It's extremely contrived and is only there to bridge the narrative gap between the ending of the first movie and the ending of the first game. But hey, at least they were able to get Rada Mitchell back for one scene. Also, did we really need a backstory for Heather's vest? It's just a vest. Anyway, Heather walks to the bus stop, and along the way she encounters a homeless man, who she hallucinates is some sort of faceless monster for another jump scare. There are several of these gruesome hallucination scenes in the movie. If you really wanted to give this movie the benefit of the doubt, you might argue that they're playing into the running theme in the games that the monsters and all the other supernatural phenomena in Silent Hill aren't real, and the protagonists are actually crazy. But the games are never this on the nose with the concept, and nothing meaningful is ever done with these hallucination scenes. I'm pretty sure that they're just there for the ADD-addled general audiences that Sony wanted to appeal to.
This whole thing is just so on the nose. It's just so like horror. Look, it's horror.
Scenes can never be calm for too long because the lowest common denominator will get bored. Ironically, this makes the movie less scary because you need calm and quiet to build tension. When something pointless is jumping up and yelling in your face or smearing blood and feces on itself every few minutes, it's not genuinely terrifying. It's just shocking and unpleasant. After Heather encounters the homeless man, she briefly meets Douglas Cartland in a scene that directly parallels the mall scene where they meet in Silent Hill 3, but lamer. Unlike in the mall scene, where Douglas is straightforward about wanting to talk to Heather, here he pretends he doesn't know who Heather is and tells her she looks familiar. I don't know why he does this. In the next scene he's in, he reveals he knows exactly who Heather is, and assuming his motivations are the same as in the game, which they seem to be, he has no reason to put on this act, since he'd be exposed anyway as soon as he revealed his true intentions. Maybe Douglas's character was originally supposed to be taken in a different direction, but that changed during the writing process, and the dialogue in this scene is left over from an earlier draft. Regardless, Heather tells Douglas she can't talk because she has to catch her bus, and unlike in the game, this isn't just because she doesn't want to talk to him. She actually has to go. Real smart, detective. But the big elephant in the room is, of course, Heather herself. This scene is when the difference in character between Heather in the movie and Heather in the game becomes very apparent. According to Bassett, Heather was made, quote, somewhat less of a smartass to make her, quote, more realistic. A statement that makes me wonder if Bassett has ever spoken to a teenager. Lots of teens could turn being a smartass into an Olympic sport. I've actually always found Heather to be an unusually good depiction of a teenager in media. She's less filtered and more emotional than the stoic 30s and 40s aged men who make up most of Silent Hill's protagonists. She's also snarky and, to be perfectly honest, a little bit of an asshole.
You're still alive.
Heather, what, Heather?
Oh! Just a joke.
You've got terrible taste.
Sorry.
She's a punk kid. These may technically be flaws, but they're also the traits that make her such an interesting and fun character. And sometimes they become a source of strength. Whereas most Silent Hill protagonists tend to take more of a quiet back seat during cutscene interactions, Heather is a much more assertive presence. I don't think it's necessarily unrealistic either. Heather lashes out plenty in the game, which is understandable considering the intense situation she's dealing with at such a young age.
Don't talk about my dad like that!
And her snarkiness could be seen as a coping mechanism. One also could argue that as a partial reincarnation of Emolessa, she has subconscious memories that make her more resilient to the horrors of the game than she might otherwise be. I consider Heather to be one of the two best Silent Hill protagonists, along with James Sunderland, both for very different reasons. In Revelation, Heather is just bland. By making her, quote, less of a smartass, the movie removes basically everything about her personality that made her, and her interactions with other characters, interesting. She's just generic female horror movie survivor now. She takes everything very seriously. She's kinda stoic, I guess, a bit mopey. Adelaide Clemens, the actress who played her, does about as good a job as could be expected with the material she was given. The acting in Revelation is another of the things that's better than I remember, and she's really giving it her all, but there's just nothing memorable here. After the bus stop scene, it's time for Heather in high school. In pretty much the entire Silent Hill franchise, there's a relentless feeling of isolation. You spend most of the games alone, only interacting occasionally with a handful of characters. Even places where you might expect there to be other people, like the mall in the intro of Silent Hill 3, none are shown. The first movie got away from this a little with the cultists, but even in that, Rose is alone most of the time, and the cultists are hostile and dehumanized in a way that preserves the isolation. Revelation doesn't really even attempt to recreate this isolation. Instead, we have Heather getting made fun of by high school mean girls for being poor.
You get all of your clothes from Goodwill?
What is it with really bad Western adaptations of Japanese properties and turning the protagonist into high school dorks who get bullied? Anyway, the teacher does absolutely nothing about this. Not even a lazy, now be nice. This woman is on tenure. Heather responds to the bullying with a very unnatural, melodramatic speech about how she moves around a lot and doesn't want to make any friends.
So don't bother trying to remember my name because I'm sure as hell not going to remember yours. Don't talk to me. We won't be friends. I won't IM you or Facebook you or tweet you, read your blog.
Before basically insulting the whole class.
I don't think there are too many original thinkers in this room.
This may have been meant to show that even though she's less of a smartass, she's still a strong girl boss who ain't gonna take no crap. But she just comes across as a pretentious dork.
I don't think there are too many original thinkers in this room.
This would also draw more attention to her than she probably wants, but she's a teenager. Teenagers do stupid things when they're angry or horny, so whatever. Speaking of which, there's only one part of the high school scenes that's actually relevant to the rest of the movie: the introduction of Vincent. Oh yes, it's time to talk about Silent Hill Revelations' least faithfully adapted character. The only things that movie Vincent has in common with game Vincent are that he's a guy, white, a member of Silent Hill's cult, and he wears a vest for most of the movie. He's aged down, his personality is completely different, his relationships with the other characters are completely different, and he doesn't even wear glasses. He might not even have the same full name. In the novelization of Silent Hill, Vincent's last name is Smith. In Revelation, he's called Vincent Cooper at one point, although this might be a fake name, and in the credits he's just called Vincent. Unsurprisingly, fans of the game's Vincent were pretty unhappy with this take on the character. But once again, let's look at movie Vincent as his own character on his own merits. Let's just think of him as Cooper, an original movie character. Does he work? Heck no. Cooper is a mess who exists to give Heather a love interest and makes very little sense as a character in his own right. In fairness to Bassett, I think this decision was quite likely forced by Sony executives. If there's anything that screams out-of-touch studio executive decision, it's Heather needs a love interest to get some of that Twilight fandom money. In the movies, the cult members have been trapped in the otherworld for 30 years, so Cooper has spent pretty much his entire life in a hell dimension raised by weird apocalyptic cultists. Cult members can escape the otherworld, but only for a short time before they're presumably yanked back, and only by getting a big ol' halo of the sun carved into their skin. We see this being done to Cooper in a flashback where he looks about the same age as he does now, and there's no other marks on his skin suggesting he's ever had this done to him before. Therefore, it's a pretty safe bet that Cooper has very little experience with the normal world. Despite this, he's surprisingly well adjusted. Extremely so. He talks about Facebook and makes a pop culture joke about ancient Indian burial grounds. Maybe the cult prepped him. Maybe they had a copy of Pet Sematary in the other world. Still, what basis does he have to say Heather is really messed up?
You're pretty fucked up, but I don't know.
When his mother is Claudia and his grandfather is Leonard. Oh yeah, that's another thing the movie changes. Cooper also starts talking slightly differently after he reveals that he's a member of the Order. He's more formal sounding, and all the references to modern things stop. It's noticeable and unnatural, and it all adds up to feel like Cooper was written as two different characters. One before his reveal as a cultist to fool the audience, and a different one afterwards to act more consistent with his backstory. And then there's his character arc. Hoo boy. Cooper was raised his whole life believing that Heather was the incarnation of evil, basically Satan. He flips from believing this to being totally devoted to her, to the point he's willing to betray everyone he's ever known and sacrifice himself for her, in the course of about a day. During that day, Heather spends several hours not wanting to talk to him, then takes advantage of him knowing how to drive to help her get to Silent Hill. She does nothing heroic while she's with him, nothing that would be particularly convincing that she's a good person. If she were actually evil and manipulating him, she'd have had a really easy time. What a simp. In short, Cooper isn't really a character. He's a plot device love interest who only exists to give Heather what she needs, in more ways than one. So Cooper doesn't work as a character on his own merits, and he doesn't resemble Vincent at all, but that's not all. His existence in the movie also ruins the Revelation version of Douglas. What do I mean? Well, after Heather's school day and the introduction of Cooper, she sees Douglas waiting for her outside the school. She gets freaked out and runs from him while calling her dad. Smart work blowing your cover earlier, detective. Heather hallucinates a bit more before Douglas corners her, gives her an awkward exposition dump of his activities and motivation, and then is killed off by the missionary. Douglas is really only in the movie for 2 brief scenes, and it's only in the second one that anything about him is established. It's insanely rushed, and while his arc from Silent Hill 3 is basically kept the same, here it's only shared in dialogue and he lacks any apparent motivation. In the game, Douglas went from working for the cult and thinking Heather is a kidnapping victim to trusting Heather because he saw that the cult murdered a man. In the movie, he switches from working for to against the cult off-screen for no apparent reason without ever talking to Heather. Why is Douglas's role in the film so small and butchered? To make more room for Cooper. From here on out, Cooper fills the role that Douglas did in the game, driving Heather to Silent Hill, for instance. Because again, the movie has to have a love interest, and you can't do that with Douglas for obvious reasons.
Do I have to scream?
Sorry.
Even if they aged him down an absurd amount, at some point he's just not believable as a PI. Anyway, Douglas is killed, and Heather runs and hides in a janitor's closet before getting spooked into leaving by the janitor. When she goes outside, the police have already found Douglas's body. Despite her just bursting out of a door to the building where a guy was just brutally murdered, the police don't care at all about Heather, and an officer just shoos her off the crime scene without asking her a single question. Then, literally immediately afterwards, the police find her jacket covered in blood and a picture of her in Douglas's things, which none of them recognize as being the girl who just came out of the building, who they just shooed away from the crime scene and is still watching them in the crowd. Just change the editing and score a little, and this scene belongs in Keystone Cops. While the cops are busy being comedically incompetent, Cooper comes up behind Heather and starts talking to her, which she responds to by making inarticulate noises and power walking away. Now consider for a moment what this should look like from Cooper's perspective. He was no doubt lurking around trying to find Heather again, who he's been taught his whole life is the Antichrist. When he finds her, he also finds a crime scene with a dead body, which he acts evasive about and immediately flees. The obvious conclusion for Cooper to come to is that Heather totally murdered a guy. But Cooper doesn't seem to care at all, and this won't dissuade him from becoming Heather's loyal simp later. Cooper takes Heather to the bus stop, they ride the bus, and then he walks her to her house. They talk about some stuff, but none of it's really important except that Cooper tells Heather that his mom threw his grandfather in an insane asylum. Unlike in the game where it's ambiguous if Leonard is a manifestation of the town made from Claudia's psyche, like certain monsters in Silent Hill 2, or a person who transformed into a monster, Revelation makes it very clear that Leonard is a real person. Mystery and room for audience interpretation are stripped away and everything is made very straightforward. And I gotta say, Silent Hill plotlines stripped of mystery and made straightforward aren't nearly as interesting or emotionally engaging. At least not in my opinion. Cooper drops Heather off at her house. Heather goes inside to find that the wall is painted with the halo of the sun and a message, "Come to Silent Hill." Heather's dad is also gone, but not dead. It's kind of ambiguous at this point, but in a couple of scenes it's made explicit that Chris is alive. Another major departure from Silent Hill 3, one that robs the story of most of its emotional core. The death of Harry in Silent Hill 3 was one of the most emotionally powerful moments in the series, and actually kind of a risky decision. Revelation changing Heather's motive from avenging her father to rescuing him is still functional, but kind of meh. It works as a motivation, but it's not nearly as powerful. And that kind of sums up most of the first hour or so of this movie. It's bad, but not in a crazy or entertaining way. It's actually a pretty by-the-numbers, crappy American horror film treatment of Silent Hill 3's plot. That changes, however, in the last half hour, when the movie takes a big metaphorical crap in its pants. But we're not quite there yet. Cooper comes to the door because he heard Heather yell, and even though Heather was like, "I'm not giving you my number, it's not like I like you or anything, Baka," earlier, now she's like, "Okay, I'll just tell you everything, whatever." She gets out her and Chris's secret box of Silent Hill stuff, including a letter from Chris, the seal of Mediturn, and a gun. Smith & Wesson 5946, by the way. Cooper reacts with, "Whoa, a gun?" "Yeah, settle down, Cooper. You grew up in the other world, not Europe." The cops show up, and Heather gives Cooper her dad's car keys because he can drive and she can't. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you think about it. Heather and her dad were living that fugitive life, and he apparently taught her how to use a gun, but not a car? Meanwhile, Cooper grew up with the Order in the other world. Does the Order have working cars in the other world? We never see them use any. Regardless, it's an excuse to have Cooper tag along without looking too suspicious before he reveals he's a cult member. Cooper and Heather start up the car and drive off without alerting the police at the front door through the power of editing. One of the police says this line,
You wanted probable cause? This is it.
which is total nonsense because probable cause is what police need to search somewhere without a warrant. They broke down the door. They're already past probable cause. And what is their actual reason for doing this? It was daylight when Chris was taken, and it's dark now, so it's not like someone saw it happen and called it in because it's been at least an hour or two. Heather and Cooper both say they didn't call the cops. Claudia wouldn't because it would ruin her plan to get Heather to come to Silent Hill, so it must have been a neighbor who heard Heather yell for her dad a few times. Is that enough for police to kick down the front door? I'll admit this is a bit of a nitpick, but there are a lot of contrivances in this movie. In fact, another major one is coming right up. Heather and Cooper drive to Silent Hill while Heather reads a letter from her dad in a scene that once again mirrors another one from the game, Heather's drive with Douglas, but without any of the emotional weight. Heather and Cooper stop at an inn to spend the night, and the next morning, while trying to convince Heather to not go to Silent Hill, Cooper reveals that he is a child of the Order. Dun dun dun! Of course, this isn't a surprise to anyone who was at all familiar with Vincent in the game. He also stops talking like a normal person and starts talking kind of like a teenage fanfiction writer trying to imitate Shakespeare. Something else that Cooper does in this scene that a lot of people might not think much about, but is actually extremely important to the plot, is reveal a couple of rules that the Order apparently has to follow. Unlike in the game, the cult in the movie believes that Heather and Alyssa are evil and wants to kill them to free themselves from Silent Hill. Heather helpfully points out the plot hole that this opens up. Why didn't they just kidnap her instead of her dad, take her to Silent Hill, and kill her if that's their goal? Cooper replies that Heather has to come to Silent Hill of her own free will, and they can't kill her until her soul reunites with Alessa's. Why and how do they know that? Well, the reason is because if it weren't for these arbitrary rules, the cult could kidnap or kill Heather several times during the movie, and then the movie would be over. Case in point, Cooper and Heather start fighting over the seal of metatrauma, which causes them to cross over into the dark world, where the missionary knocks Heather out and grabs Cooper. The missionary could have easily captured or killed Heather here, but of course doesn't. Once you realize these restrictions exist, the cult's threat level is significantly neutered for most of the movie. Heather wakes up to walk outside and find it's snowing ash, which means she's in the other world. She walks down the street to reveal the Silent Hill sign is only like 10 feet away from the inn. So Jack's Inn is right outside the city limits, but apparently this didn't count as being in Silent Hill, since Cooper made a big deal about Heather not going to Silent Hill while they were in the inn, and since the missionary didn't capture her after knocking her out. I guess whatever supernatural forces have decreed that Heather has to come to Silent Hill of her own free will are big sticklers for city lines. You might assume that the cult doesn't want to capture her at this point because she hasn't reunited with Alyssa, but this is actually not portrayed consistently later in the movie. Anyway, Heather comes to the town square where some dead guys are tied to pyres. The wood on the pyres looks burned, but the dead bodies don't, so I'm not sure what exactly killed them. Here Heather encounters Dahlia. I'm gonna be honest, I never bothered to pay much attention to the movie version of Dahlia. Despite being Alyssa's mother, she's actually not an important character. In the game, she's the cause of the entire Alyssa plot, but in the movie, she's just a passive observer. Dahlia tells Heather Alyssa's backstory in a scene that's not too interesting if you've seen the first movie. At the end of the exposition, the other world changes to the dark world again, and Heather runs into a random building. After walking through the building, birthday cake is a nice touch and a rare bit of subtlety, Heather comes to a big dirty mannequin storeroom. After getting jump-scared by a mannequin or two, she comes across a naked woman on a table who transforms into a mannequin. Heather then finds another woman wrapped in plastic who she frees, but they're both attacked by a monster made of multiple mashed-together mannequin parts. This scene is full of reminders that this movie was shot in 3D, along with the finest CGI of 1999. The monster's design is fairly creepy, but the effects look so bad it's really hard to take seriously. The woman Heather rescued tells her her name and that her and the woman who turned into a mannequin got lost while driving. It doesn't really matter because she's almost immediately killed by the mannequin monster. Why her friend turned into a mannequin and why they both ended up in this mannequin storehouse in the positions they were in when Heather found them is never explained. Heather escapes the mannequin monster, which will never show up again. This entire scene has no connection to the rest of the movie's plot. Cut to a short scene of Cooper talking with Claudia after he was captured. Cooper tells Claudia that Heather isn't evil, to which Claudia replies that Cooper has gone insane, but thanks him for bringing Heather to Silent Hill anyway, before having him hauled off to the asylum. Claudia's really big on locking people in the asylum in this movie. Also, I found her acting to be on the hammy side, although that may be partially because of the dialogue.
You're insane. Just as your grandfather is insane.
Also, this is where Chris is confirmed to be still alive, but he doesn't do or say much of anything until the very end of the movie. Also, what is he tied to? In the games, the cult always represented its gods and angels with angelic humanoid beings. Definitely not the cult in this movie if they're using this for decoration. The cult's appearance in this movie doesn't really match up with the previous one either. In the first movie, the cult had a sort of old-fashioned Puritanish aesthetic, at least when they weren't wearing mining outfits. Here they have this try-hard bondage D&D cult aesthetic with heavy-handed use of visuals from the game and mining outfits. It doesn't come together very well, and it feels like a collection of stuff an edgy 13-year-old would associate with Silent Hill and think is cool. So Heather leaves the Mannequin building by climbing out of a vent, conveniently like 10 feet away from Brookhaven Asylum. Nitpick again, but this ridiculous convenience could have easily been avoided by showing Heather climbing out of the vent before the Claudia and Cooper cutscene, and then cutting to her arriving at Brookhaven afterwards, creating the impression she had to walk a little ways. Anyway, she goes inside and finds Leonard's file in the front office because Cooper told her earlier that he got the other half of the seal of mediation and she's gonna need it. Heather gets attacked by a monster, which she kills with her gun. Score one for the Second Amendment. Heather comes to Leonard's room, where the man himself is played by Malcolm McDowell. Credit where it's due, it's good casting. Malcolm McDowell is sort of the Donald Pleasance of our generation. He's in a lot of garbage, but he's always entertaining. He also sounds uncannily similar to Matt Lagan's vocal performance as Leonard from the game.
My old daughter says I'm corrupted by the darkness. She says that I'm a monster.
I can feel the hatred.
What?
Behind your words. The anger. You plan to kill her, don't you?
Leonard is obviously not a monster when he first appears in Revelation. Part of the reason for this is no doubt to make sure that the audience recognizes Malcolm McDowell so the movie can get his money's worth out of him. But it was also probably done to avoid confusing normie audience members. The way Leonard is introduced differently in this movie, not as a voice on the phone, but just through exposition, wouldn't really make that twist hit the same anyway. The film definitely leans more into Leonard being crazy, which I never got the sense of in the game. He was a religious fanatic, yes, but not some cackling lunatic. Also, Leonard is blind in the movie, and he's wearing a fishing net for some reason. Leonard and Heather talk, and Leonard tells Heather that Cooper is in the asylum being tortured. How he knows this when Cooper barely got taken to the asylum and Leonard is locked up in isolation, I have no idea. He says if they listen closely, they might hear Cooper screaming, but there is no screaming, and as we'll soon see, Cooper's torture never actually even starts. Oh well, maybe some supernatural thing he told him. Heather holds up the seal of mutation and asks him if it will help her, because she somehow forgot or didn't notice that Leonard is very obviously blind. So Leonard reminds her and she gives him the seal, but points her gun at him because she's not completely stupid. Leonard says that the other half of the seal is inside him and stabs himself in the chest with the seal, absorbing it. This heals his blindness. I don't know, just go with it. As soon as he can see Heather, Leonard starts strangling her.
Based.
I guess he's not following the cult rules about her needing to reunite with Dark Alyssa, so Heather shoots him.
Based.
Which sends him flying backwards a ridiculous distance. Did Joe Biden co-write this scene? But Leonard isn't dead, and he transforms into his monster version, which allows him to shrug off Heather's bullets, knock her gun away, and clobber her. He starts to carry Heather off, but Heather notices that his chest now has a glowing hole in it, and the seal is inside, so she pulls it out, and he explodes in a burst of light and ash. This sequence feels more like something that belongs in a video game than the boss fight with Leonard in the actual video game. So the Leonard fight was a bit tismy, for lack of a better word, but buckle up, because that was nothing. The rest of the movie from this point is a dumb train to crazy town with no brakes. Heather walks through a corridor of cells and gets grabbed through the bars by a prisoner. Then all the prisoners reach out and try to grab her. Heather calls for help, and Pyramid Head shows up and starts chopping off prisoners' arms. What is there to say about this scene except why? Why is any of this? Why are the prisoners trying to grab Heather? The two guys that do grab her don't really seem to know what to do afterwards. They just kinda hold her and yell until she fights her way free. Why are prisoners who Heather is nowhere near sticking their arms out of their cells? Why do they keep sticking their arms out after Pyramid Head starts chopping them off? And saying they're crazy isn't a good justification. Crazy people don't all act alike. These are more like badly programmed NPCs. As for Pyramid Head, I'll get to him later. Heather just kind of wanders off from this scene and spies two cultists wheeling Cooper down a hall on a gurney. How convenient. The cultists push Cooper into some kind of operation room that's full of Silent Hill's now trademark nurse monsters. The nurses in the movies react to sound, so the cultists loudly wheeling a gurney into their room causes them to attack. The cultists respond by very lazily and half-assedly trying to defend themselves. One of them shocks one of the nurse monsters with a cattle prod while yelling at the rest to get back, like they're going to listen. And of course all the other nurse monsters, who he turned his back on, immediately attack him from behind and kill him. The other cultist then drops to his knees to check on his obviously dead buddy, and of course he immediately gets attacked and killed by the nurses too. This short fight scene, if you can even call it that, is so dumb it's kind of hard to do justice with a description. The cultists seem to barely care about the nurses, or just not realize how dangerous they are, even after the nurses kill one. Why didn't they try to get away and wheel Cooper back out as soon as they saw them? They're outnumbered by like 12-2. Did they know the nurses were there but not think they would attack them? Did they not realize the nurses are set off by sound? How could they be cultists who've lived trapped in the other world their whole lives and not know any of this stuff? Why didn't the cultists clear the asylum of monsters if they're using it? Are cultists just constantly getting killed by monsters while working in the asylum? It's so stupid. By the way, before the fight between the cultists and the nurses, the camera pans slowly over all the nurses, and you can see some of the actresses wobbling under the strain of holding their positions. Don't get me wrong, it's still impressive that they hold these contorted, incredibly uncomfortable positions for what were no doubt multiple shots, but even this slight movement spoils the illusion that they're inhuman monsters. In the first movie, they also had the nurses freeze like this, but the lighting was dark, so it hid this stuff better. After the nurses kill the cultists, they freeze, and Cooper figures out in like 2 seconds after trying to escape that they're triggered by sound. If these two idiots had been half as smart as him, they might have lived. Heather sneaks into the room, questions Cooper about where to find her dad, and Cooper pleads with her to free him, which he actually sounds annoyed by. Were you just gonna leave him? Cold, Heather. Of course, when Heather starts untying Cooper, the nurses move a lot slower and more clumsily than they did when they killed the cultists. Plot armor, baby. Her and Cooper escape, run outside, go down an alley, and the amusement park that Chris is being hauled at is right there. How convenient. Right next to the insane asylum. I know the Silent Hill series messes around with surreal architecture and non-Euclidean geometries, but this is not that. This is silly and lazy. In the games, the basic layout of the town was still designed like a real town. That's why the strange things that subvert it are more unnerving. It feels like a real place, so the supernatural elements have a kind of uncanny valley effect. Here, the writer just couldn't think of a clever way to get Cooper and Heather to the different locations quickly, so they're all right next to each other. Heather and Cooper head into the amusement park, and a patrol of cultists start chasing them. But why? But why? If they wanted to capture Heather, the missionary could have done it earlier. I thought they were waiting for her to reunite with Emolessa. As for Cooper, they probably shouldn't even know he escaped. There were no living witnesses. Oh well, it's been about 2 minutes, so I guess we need another action scene. Cooper tells Heather that these mining suit guys are part of an elite group within the cult called the Brethren. Interesting note, Christoph Gans, the director of the first movie, said that the Brethren was the name of the whole cult in the first movie, which is kind of a funny name because they're led by a woman. Both Gans and Bassett stated in interviews before Revelation came out that the Brethren were a completely different cult from the Order, which makes sense. Their motives are completely different from in the game, and in the first movie they used completely different symbolism. The halo of the sun wasn't in the first movie at all. They used this branching cross thing, which only makes a brief cameo in the second movie. But in Revelation, it's made very clear that there's only one cult, the Order of Altael, and it's the same in both movies. And the Brethren are just this elite part of the cult. Cooper also says that the Brethren wear mining suits because they believe that breathing the air of the other world will taint them. Well, apparently they're right, because Heather rips off one of their masks in a scuffle and he immediately falls down, turns gray, and starts coughing up black liquid. Presumably he dies. So the Order's elites are weaker than the regular cult members. Everything with the Brethren in this feels like it was being made up as the movie was already being filmed. Then again, that might have been most of the movie. Cooper distracts the Brethren while Heather runs to the carousel. The Brethren surround it and all get lit on fire. It's pretty much exactly like the dream sequence from the beginning, including some of the shots, except of course for Cooper. Dark Alessa appears and says that because Heather came to Silent Hill after she told her not to, she's going to absorb her. Then we get the hug battle. Yes, Heather and Dark Alessa hug while some CGI special effects play and they exchange cheesy dramatic one-liners. This fight scene, if you can call it that, is a highlight of the movie for all the wrong reasons. It looks ridiculous, the dialogue is straight out of a bad fan fiction, but boy do the cinematography and the actress try to sell it. I mentioned that Adelaide Clemens gives a fine performance as Heather, but most of the movie she's just kind of stoically upset, which is pretty boring. Watching her act opposite herself as Dark Alessa is definitely a highlight. Eventually, Heather overwhelms Dark Alessa, who burns up and turns into smoke, which shoots up Heather's nose. Why did Heather win the hug fight? No idea. There's literally no reason for it except that she's the protagonist. Imagine what a twist it would be if Dark Alessa won. That at least would have been memorable. Dark Alessa in Revelation is actually sort of based on two different characters. Memory of Alessa from Silent Hill 3, and the version of Dark Alessa that was in the first movie. Supposedly she's the same character as the one in the first movie, but their personalities are completely different. In the first movie, this character calls herself the dark part of Alessa, but she also never talks about Alessa in first person, said that she's had many names, and that she was the dark part of Alessa right now. The implication seemed to be that the first movie's Dark Alessa was actually not just part of Alessa, but something more ancient, a manifestation of one of the town's deities, perhaps. Especially since another version of Alessa appeared in the finale as a barbed wire tentacle monster, but Dark Alessa was still there just hanging out and watching the carnage. And while she did want to punish the cult members for what they did to Alessa, she went about it in a rather calm, detached way. Dark Alessa in Revelation always refers to herself as Alessa in the first person and is very emotional. As for Memory of Alessa, she's fought in the game on the carousel, just like Dark Alessa, and Dark Alessa is clearly designed to look like her, although Memory of Alessa looked more like a corpse or zombie, while Dark Alessa just looks like she's going to a black metal concert. And Memory of Alessa also never spoke. She was a silent antagonist whose motives weren't even revealed until after she was defeated. Revelation's Dark Alessa is less intimidating than either character she's based on. She's basically just an angsty, edgy teenager. You might say it's appropriate to the character's background, but it's not the same character that was in the first movie or the game, despite how we're supposed to think it is. Kind of like how a couple of other characters were adapted. Except at least those are supposed to be adaptations. This is supposed to be the same character. Anyway, Heather passes out after breathing in the Dark Alessa fumes, but wakes up again, and Pyramid Head, who was cranking the carousel around the whole time, stops. I like to think this is a really awkward moment for him. Heather sees this sort of concrete hallway a short distance away and decides to walk down it for no apparent reason. She comes to an area that looks like it's underneath a stadium. The sanctuary that Claudia is in is supposed to be underneath the amusement park, but Heather never goes down any stairs. She just walks, and there's Chris, and a bunch of cult members, and Claudia. How convenient. Heather confronts Claudia, and the movie gives us possibly the stupidest plot twist / retcon ever put to film. Claudia tells Heather that she actually likes her now because she got rid of Dark Alessa. She also says the cult only burned Alessa because they knew she could take it, vaguely implying that the cult of the movie was actually trying to birth their god. And it's just like the cult in the games. This not only contradicts tons of things in the first movie, where cult leader Christabella actually cited Exodus 22:18, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," and the cult was clearly all about burning witches for punishment reasons. It also contradicts earlier in the same movie when Claudia threw Cooper in the asylum to be lobotomized for even suggesting that Heather might not be evil. And if this is supposed to be a trick, it's not a very good one. After Claudia thanks Heather for defeating Dark Alessa, Heather says to let her dad go, and Claudia straight tells her, "Nah, we're still gonna kill him." Then she asks Heather to give her the seal of meta-commentary. Why would she ever think Heather would go for this? Well, Heather goes for it. Not because she likes or trusts Claudia, but because she, in her words, wants the seal to show what Claudia really is. And oh snap, Claudia was the missionary all along. So the seal turns people into monsters. And apparently Heather knew this, based on the line she said before giving Claudia the seal, presumably because she got all of Dark Alessa's knowledge by absorbing her, or because she was slowly remembering things throughout the movie, like in Silent Hill 3, but unlike the game, the movie does a terrible job of establishing this. This is also a really stupid thing to do regardless. Claudia normally is just a middle-aged woman. As the missionary, she has superhuman speed, strength, and agility. Also, the last time a guy transformed like this in front of Heather, it made him immune to bullets. Good job. Well, after transforming, the missionary immediately swings one of its blade arms down to kill Heather, but it's blocked by a giant knife. And yes, it's Pyramid Head. Now, most people were probably too distracted by Pyramid Head showing up and what's about to happen to take note of Heather's facial expressions. But, if you look, she wasn't surprised at all by Claudia transforming into the missionary, but she was surprised by Pyramid Head showing up and saving her life. So what the heck was the plan here? Was this a failed suicide attempt? Whatever, we're almost done. The missionary and Pyramid Head fight while Heather frees Cooper and Chris, and all those other cult members who were around just kinda cease to exist. The missionary stabs Pyramid Head several times, but then Pyramid Head cuts off the missionary's head. And with that, the conflict in the movie is over. Pyramid Head is the true hero of this movie. He saved the day, he beat the big bad, and then he walks off into the sunset. Or firelight. And Heather did basically nothing. Now, making Pyramid Head a good guy, quote unquote, is certainly a... But as I said this whole time, I'm not just going to dismiss something or call it bad just because it's different from the games. And taken on its own merits, this is bad. Pyramid Head is barely in the movie before the finale. He turns a crank in the background a couple of times and chops off some people's arms in one scene. And that scene is only there so that he's more than a background extra before the finale. There's no reason for anyone who hasn't played any of the games to feel any emotional attachment to this thing. And people who are fans of the games are just going to be pissed off by the change to the character. Again. So there's no stakes to this climactic fight scene, except maybe that the missionary would survive and Heather would have to defeat her, which would have been a more satisfying ending. The protagonist of the movie actually doing something. But once again, whatever. This is just one of the biggest of a constant stream of narrative problems that if I actually dissected them all in detail would make this video 7 hours long. It's time for Silent Hill Revelation to end. Heather, Cooper, and Chris walk towards the edge of town, but Chris turns back, telling Heather he's going to try to find her mom, Rose. So Chris's story ends in almost the exact same place it did in the first movie, teasing a sequel that would very loosely be based on Silent Hill 2, considering the major differences between Chris's backstory and James Sunderland's. Heather and Cooper leave him and walk out of town, and the fog is gone. Shouldn't they still be trapped in the other world? They need the seal of meta-narrative to escape. That's a really important plot point in this series. Or maybe in between these scenes they carved the halo of the sun on each other. Whatever. They're picked up by Travis Grady, teasing a movie version of Silent Hill Origins. And as Travis drives them away in his truck, a prison bus surrounded by police cars drives in the other direction, teasing a Silent Hill Downpour movie. Then the film cuts to a scene of a man named Henry Townsend renting an apartment, and then a shot of MJ Bassett holding up a copy of Silent Hill Homecoming and flipping it off. Okay, those last two don't actually happen, but holy crap, Silent Hill Revelation has as many endings as Peter Jackson's Return of the King, all teasing sequels that are probably never going to happen. But hey, we made it to the end, and it's time for the credits to play us out to the tune of... The Rain of Brass Pedals, 3 voices edit. Yeah, Silent Scream is the second end credits song. The Rain of Brass Pedals is a fine song, but it's also straight from the Silent Hill 3 soundtrack. Silent Scream was written and performed specifically for this movie. It's the one unironically good thing to come out of this movie, and most people who saw the film in theaters probably didn't even hear it because it's the second end credits song. Well, I guess I should talk a little bit about the soundtrack. Revelation's music is almost entirely remixes of songs from the video games. And the Silent Hill games have a lot of great music, but Revelation samples Never Forgive Me, Never Forget Me very heavily, to the point where it drowns out everything else. Again, it's a fine song. I even made a remix of it. But there are so many other good tracks that could have been used that are neglected for this one. So that was Silent Hill Revelation. It's bad. Really bad. But is it so bad it's good? The last third of the movie, I would say, it gets so stupid in such a weird way that it becomes very entertaining and hilarious, if you're in the right mindset. Unfortunately, to get to the funny part, you have to get through the first hour of the movie that's jam-packed with clunky exposition delivered by characters who are much more boring versions of their game counterparts. I swear, like 20 solid minutes of this movie is just Heather and Cooper explaining the plot to each other. It's not funny or ironically entertaining, it's just dull. From a more analytical standpoint, the movie is interesting for how it's trying to be so many things at once and failing miserably at all of them. Bassett said that Revelation was supposed to be a sequel first and an adaptation second. It's a bad sequel. It makes major retcons to the events of the first movie that are downright insulting to anyone who cared about the first movie's lore. It also has lengthy scenes re-explaining what happened in the first movie that are pretty tedious if you've seen and remember that movie. The visuals and tone are also drastically different from the first movie, so if you like the first movie, it doesn't mean you're going to like this one. It's also a bad adaptation of the game it's based off. Major characters, including the lead, have drastically different personalities that didn't need to be changed to make this film fit in with the first movie. And the changes make them a lot less interesting than their game counterparts. It also doesn't work as a standalone movie. Even with all the exposition crammed in, there are still so many references that aren't explained that would be weird, out of place, and confusing to people who aren't familiar with the other movie or the games. Overall, it's a case of trying to please everyone and ending up pleasing no one. But as I said, there are a few things I liked about the movie, so let's end on that since so few people say anything nice about Revelation. The set pieces, lighting, and practical effects are actually pretty good. Yes, there's bad CGI and obvious 3D gimmick shots, which everyone mentions when they talk about this movie, but aside from that, it's actually not a bad-looking film. MJ Bassett, the director, did a much better job than MJ Bassett, the writer. A lot of actors really are doing their best with the material they're working with. Sean Bean is Sean Bean, Malcolm McDowell is Malcolm McDowell, and Adelaide Clemens and Kit Harington are really trying with what they're given. And of course it gave us Silent Scream, another in a long line of really good Akira Yamaoka, Mary Elizabeth McGlynn songs. So for that, I'll always be a little grateful it exists. This movie is only worth watching in very specific circumstances. If you're having a very casual bad movie night where you invite some friends over, crack open some drinks, order a pizza, and don't really pay too much attention to the movie until you've eaten and drank your fill, when you can settle in and laugh at the finale. Or if you're just an over-analytical nerd who wants to pick apart all the things that are wrong with it. It really is one of the worst official pieces of Silent Hill media. Scott C. Anson's comics that are Silent Hill in name only being the contender for that. But we've got a bunch of new Silent Hill games coming up, so who knows? Maybe it will have some competition. Or maybe they'll be great. Hopefully. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you liked the video, please click like, comment to share your own thoughts, and subscribe if you want to see more. But be aware that YouTube is very dodgy about sharing this channel's uploads with you, so it's good to check back occasionally. I try to have something out every couple of weeks to a month, with occasional months of silence due to life or working on a bigger project. Have a great day, and I wish you all the best for the new year.